They stamped one word in bold red letters across his kennel: aggressive. To the staff, it meant danger. To the visitors, it was a warning to keep away. Behind the metal bars, a young German shepherd barked, lunged, and bared his teeth at anyone who passed. He looked like every stereotype of a bad dog. But here's the question nobody bothered to ask: why? What no one knew was that beneath the growls and the hardened stare was a heart that had simply been broken too many times. And if someone dared to look past the label, they would discover not a monster, but a puppy longing to be loved. This is Walter's story, and it might just change the way you see every shelter dog you'll ever meet. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll understand why no label should ever define a soul. The shelter smelled of disinfectant and damp concrete. Rows of kennels lined each hallway, filled with barking, whining, and the kind of restless energy only abandoned dogs carry. Take a step back. His amber eyes tracked every movement, his paws scratched against the cold concrete floor, and every sound seemed to trigger another outburst. Visitors whispered as they walked past him: dangerous, untrainable, not worth it. The truth is, in a crowded shelter, labels mean survival. Dogs marked as friendly got walked more, photographed for adoption profiles, and chosen by families. Dogs like Walter, marked aggressive, were left to the background, existing more as warnings than as candidates for a second chance. I was just another volunteer when I first saw him. I had been walking through the kennels, handing out treats, trying to comfort the nervous dogs. Some pressed their noses through the bars, taking the snacks gently. Others jumped excitedly, their tails smacking against the walls. But when I reached Walter's kennel, he erupted loud, sharp barks echoing against the concrete, teeth flashing, saliva hitting the bars. Instinctively, I froze. Every part of me told me to move on, to do what everyone else did, skip him. But something about his eyes stopped me. They weren't just angry, they were tired. Beneath the fury, there was a weight, a kind of exhaustion. I crouched down slowly, careful not to provoke him further, and placed a small milk bone near the bars. At first, he ignored it, barking louder, his body rigid with tension. Then, after what felt like an eternity, his barking faltered. He sniffed the air, cautiously, and edged closer. His paws scraped against the floor as he inched forward, every movement hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to want something good. That was the moment I realized Walter wasn't aggressive. He was afraid. Of course, the shelter staff saw things differently. Tessa, the shelter manager, was pragmatic and experienced. She had seen thousands of dogs come and go, and she wasn't unkind, but she was realistic. "We can't risk placing a dog like that in a home," she told me. "If he bites, it's on us. Families want friendly. They don't want to rehabilitate a problem." She wasn't wrong. Space was limited. Resources were stretched thin. Every kennel that held a difficult dog meant another friendly one was being turned away. Walter's label wasn't just a word, it was a countdown. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was missing something, that his story was buried beneath his behavior, waiting to be uncovered. And as the days passed, I found myself drawn back to Kennel 14, again and again, determined to see past the growls. Each morning when I arrived, I could hear him before I saw him, the sharp barks bouncing down the corridor, echoing off the concrete walls. Volunteers avoided his kennel, passing by with a quick glance, as though even acknowledging him was a risk, but I couldn't help myself. Every day I stopped by Kennel 14. Sometimes I spoke softly through the bars, my words drowned out by his barking. Other times I simply sat on the cold floor, pretending to scroll through my phone, pretending I wasn't afraid. I wanted him to know that I wasn't going anywhere, that the progress was slow. One day, he sniffed at the air when I pushed a biscuit closer. Another day, he pressed his nose against the bars, close enough that I could feel his breath. It wasn't much, but in a place where seconds stretched into hours, those tiny steps felt monumental. The other volunteers didn't understand. Her voice firm but not unkind. I admire your effort, but we have limited space. Dogs with labels like his? They don't get chosen, and we can't afford to keep him forever. Her words were practical, rooted in experience. But to me, they sounded like a death sentence disguised as policy. I didn't argue Tessa wasn't the type to debate emotions, but I knew I couldn't just let Walter's story end with paperwork. The shelter itself reflected the struggle. The walls were painted a tired beige, cracked in corners, scuffed from years of leashes and paws. Posters about adoption success stories hung beside signs warning against aggressive dogs. It was a place of contradictions. Hope and heartbreak living side by side, separated only by chain-link doors. Walter's kennel was at the far end, almost tucked away, as if his barking was best kept out of sight. Families visiting rarely made it that far down the row. They stopped at the wagging tails, the floppy ears, the easy smiles. They didn't venture toward the sound of anger echoing in the distance. But one evening, something changed. I arrived late after most of the staff had left. The hallway was quieter, the barking subdued. When I walked past Walter's kennel, I expected the usual eruption. Instead, he stood silently, watching me. His ears flicked forward, his body tense but not hostile. I crouched down, my heart pounding, unsure if this was a calm before another storm. Slowly, I slid a treat across the floor. He didn't snarl. He didn't bark. He just lowered his head, sniffed, and for the first time, took the biscuit into his mouth. He chewed carefully, eyes never leaving mine, as though waiting to see if this moment would disappear as quickly as it arrived. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath. That small act, the acceptance of a simple biscuit, felt bigger than any success I'd had with the other dogs. For the first time, Walter had let me in. Walking back that night, I thought about how fragile trust really was. One wrong move, one raised hand, one loud noise, and it could all crumble again. A thought I carried home at night. Each day was a test of patience and persistence. Sometimes he made progress. Sometimes it felt like we were right back at the beginning. One morning, I approached his kennel with the same soft greeting I had been using for weeks. "Hey, buddy." At first, he barked like usual, teeth flashing, body pressed forward. But then, in a flicker of hesitation, his barking stopped. He paced, circled, growled low in his throat, but didn't lunge. It was small, but in the shelter, small victories mattered. I crouched, slid a biscuit under the bars, and he took it again, faster this time, less hesitant. My heart leapt, but by the afternoon, the progress crumbled. A janitor walked past with a mop and bucket, the handle clanging loudly against the floor. Walter exploded in fear, hurling himself at the bars, snarling so viciously that people nearby stepped back. His eyes darted wildly, his body trembling. He wasn't just barking, he was panicking. That night, the incident was logged. Tessa shook her head when she saw me lingering at his kennel. "You see what I mean?" she said. "He's unpredictable. We can't adopt out a liability." Her words cut deep. I knew what liability meant in shelter language. It meant he was living on borrowed time. Over the next week, the pressure grew heavier. New dogs arrived daily, their kennels filling fast. A golden retriever mix with big brown eyes had already caught the attention of two families. A playful beagle puppy wagged at everyone who walked by. Meanwhile, Walter remained in his corner, wearing the red, aggressive tag like a scarlet letter. Every bark seemed to confirm it, every lunge. At the bars, sealing his reputation. The other volunteers avoided him entirely. "He's too far gone," they said. "You're wasting energy." Even the kind-hearted ones looked at me with pity, as though they admired my persistence but pitied my foolishness. Inside, I wrestled with doubt. Was I making a mistake by investing so much in one dog when so many others needed help? What if I was wrong? What if Walter really was dangerous? The thought gnawed at me at night. If he snapped, if he hurt someone, would it be my fault for believing in him? But every time I considered giving up, Walter gave me a reason not to. One evening, while the shelter was closing, I sat by his kennel, exhausted. He pressed his nose against the bars, not snarling, not barking, just breathing. His eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the dog beneath the fear. It was enough that the breakthrough wasn't linear. The next few days, Walter lunged at every passerby again, as if those tender moments had never happened. I reminded myself that trust wasn't a straight road. Trauma didn't vanish overnight. Still, with each setback, the staff's patience wore thinner. Tessa called me into her office one Friday. The air smelled faintly of coffee and paperwork, her desk stacked with files of dogs waiting for space. She didn't waste words. "He's been here too long," she said, tapping Walter's file. "We can't justify it anymore. He has one more evaluation next week. If he fails, we'll have no choice but to make room." Her words were clinical, but I heard what she didn't say. Euthanasia. My throat tightened. I wanted to argue, to shout that Walter deserved more time, that he was improving. But the truth was harder. She wasn't wrong. Late one evening, I sat in my car outside the shelter, gripping the steering wheel. What if I was only seeing what I wanted to see? What if Walter never changed enough to be safe? The fear of failure clashed with the hope of possibility, tearing me in two. Meanwhile, Walter's deadline loomed closer. The shelter filled with new arrivals, families coming in and out, dogs leaving with smiling adopters. Each adoption brought joy and sadness, joy for the dog, sadness for the ones left behind. And Walter was always left behind. On the night before his evaluation, I stayed. Late again. The shelter was quiet, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I sat cross-legged on the floor by his kennel, my back aching, my eyes heavy. Walter paced, growled, then stopped. Slowly, he walked toward the bars, his ears pulled back, his eyes uncertain. He lowered his head until his nose touched the metal. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat, letting him choose. And then, gently, he rested his head against the bars. No barking, no snarling. Just quiet. It was fragile, fleeting, but it was real. I whispered, "Good boy," my voice barely audible. His eyes closed for a second, as if he allowed himself for the first time to believe he was safe. That moment carried me through the night. Each step was shaky, but Walter managed. He flinched at the clang of a dropped clipboard, but didn't lash out. He pulled hard on the leash, but didn't snap. He ignored commands at first, then hesitantly sat when Marcus repeated them with a firm but gentle tone. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't failure either. By the end, Marcus scribbled something down and turned to Tessa. "He's not ready for a family with kids, but with the right person, he might make it." Those words felt like sunlight, breaking through storm clouds. For the first time, someone besides me saw what I had seen all along. Walter wasn't a monster. He was a dog worth saving. Later that day, I sat outside with him in the small play yard. It was the first time I'd been allowed to handle him on a leash outside the kennel. The shelter records were thin, picked up as a stray, no known history. But over the next week, through small clues and conversations, pieces of his backstory emerged. A neighbor who had seen him wandering mentioned he came from a backyard where dogs were chained day and night. Another volunteer remembered hearing. He'd been left without food for days before animal control picked him up. The puzzle came together. Walter hadn't been born aggressive. He had been made this way by neglect, fear, and betrayal. Knowing that truth only deepened my resolve. He wasn't broken. He was surviving. And now, with patience, he was learning to live again. In the days that followed, his transformation grew clearer. He greeted me with cautious tail wags instead of snarls. He began taking treats from other volunteers, though nervously. He learned to sit more quickly, to walk with less pulling. Each step forward felt like watching a wall crumble, brick by brick, revealing the dog he was always meant to be. One afternoon, while sitting in the yard, he did something that nearly broke me. He lay down beside me, resting his head on my lap. For a dog once labeled aggressive, that gesture was louder than any bark. It was trust. Pure, fragile trust. Tessa walked by and saw us. For the first time, she smiled. "That's not the same dog we met weeks ago," she said. And she was right. Walter wasn't the same. He was becoming the sweetest puppy I had ever known.